This is Huffington Post's Third Metric, where we are redefining success beyond money and power. Now, do you lie about your age? Well, most of us do, even if it's just white lies. We use anti-wrinkle cream, we colour our greying hair, but should aging be covered up or fully embraced? Well, author and psychotherapist Robert Levithan takes the latter approach. In his book, The New 60, Levithan shares fresh insight on how to embrace our older selves. And joining me now on set is Robert himself, and also joining us in our Google Hangout are Joan Price, a blogger at nakedatourage.com, and Tracy Jackson, a screenwriter and the co-author of Gratitude and Trust, Recovery is Not Just for Addicts. I want to thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
It's great to have you, and a happy accident is that Robert and Tracy, you are good friends.
Very good friends.
Very good. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi. What a nice surprise, Tracy.
I know.
Well, we're going to get on to kind of coincidences and things a little bit later, but first of all, let's talk a little bit about aging, because Robert, you know, you've got a fantastic approach to aging in that 35 really was once where you thought the cap of your life was going to be. Tell us about your story.
Well, I've been HIV positive since 1984. So when I hit 35, I wasn't quite sure if I'd ever lived to see 40. So my life had an interesting trajectory in the sense that my career changed, my whole perspective changed. And facing my mortality, I think, brought me to a place where I'm more alive. But I wrote the book, The New 60, when I was approaching 60. I realized that I had never thought I would be 60 years old. And so I mean, when I turned 50, I realized I had no picture of anything beyond 50 because all I ever wanted was to get to 50. And now it's, wow, I have this opportunity to embrace being an elder and to do it in a new way because it's fresh for me. It's not, I don't have a picture of how I thought it would be, so I get to make it up as I go along.
And so obviously then you have friends that are in their 60s as well that have had a sense of, you know, where they'd be at 60. How do you feel that your approach to life on a day-to-day basis differs from theirs who have been preparing for it?
Well, oddly enough, I think a lot of my friends are people who have been open to the surprise of life. I think things have changed in the last decades. It used to be we had this model where you would choose a relationship and a career and certain things, and people expected to do one thing in life. And we're reinventing ourselves constantly. And so a lot of my friends are people who, I'm now co-writing a book with a woman who's about to turn 80. I'm doing a seminar next week with someone else who's in their 70s. And so, you know, I think I see people at the top of their game at a point when we used to think everyone would be, you know, sitting at home.
We'd all be just past it by the time you reach 50 or 60 or whatever.
Yes.
I want to read an excerpt from your book. Mark Matusik, the author of Ethical Wisdom, actually wrote this about you in the preface to your book, The New 60. And in it he says, quote, "The pre-AIDS Robert was more of a pleaser. He cared about being the good boy, keeping up appearances, being politically correct, and not ruffling feathers. Well, today he cares more about telling the truth than he does about being a poster boy for squeaky clean. This is the mark of a post-catastrophe person." What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, Mark is quite wise, and it's true that once you realize that, well, what am I waiting for? You know, that's the freedom of getting older. Is like, wow, what am I waiting for? I might as well go ahead and go for everything that I can and see what happens. And also, some people aren't going to like what I do. That probably means what I'm doing is more interesting. If everyone likes what I'm doing, I must have no edge.
And you know, because people have taken umbrage to certain things that you've written,
Oh,
particularly
absolutely.
about sex. Is one of
Yes.
the things that you rub some people up the wrong way. Why do you think?
Well, there's a cultural thing. A lot of people think, you know, you shouldn't talk about certain things. And, you know, a lot of people, you shouldn't talk about money. A lot of people, you shouldn't talk about sex. Sex life is private. And I believe in privacy, but I also don't, often it's associated with shame. You know, you shouldn't talk about that. Usually it's related to some idea that it's shameful. And I don't think there's anything shameful.
I mean, it's fascinating you bring up the word shame, because I feel that in the late 80s, you know, maybe the early 90s, particularly as somebody, you know, who is HIV positive, shame was really something that was ingrained, it felt like anyway, with the public perception of, you know, having HIV, you know, sort of having AIDS. How do you feel, did you feel that sense of shame, and how do you feel things have kind of differed now?
Well, stigma is still an issue, unfortunately. I think it's shifted, but I was fortunate. I come from a very unreasonable background. We were talking earlier about families. You know, my family doesn't buy into the belief systems that are out there. So for example, when I told my family that I was HIV positive, the response was, well, if anyone can get through this, you can. And there was no room for pity or feeling sorry for myself. It was just get on with it and live your life and do what you need to do to make, to get through this. And so I didn't actually feel a great deal of shame coming at me. But I live in the bubble. I live in the New York City, Manhattan bubble of a world where who I am and what I've been has never been a big problem for me.
And also being in a situation where you can be a 60-year-old gentleman who has a very healthy sex life and one who's not ashamed to talk about it.
Yes, but again, some people really didn't like that. They were, you really shouldn't be saying these things. Don't write about it. And it's simply what is. Also, when I wrote The New 60, I wasn't just writing for people in my own generation. I was writing for young men and women who I wanted them to know that getting older is not something to be afraid of. Because in our culture, people feel they have a shelf life.
Well, that's a good point. And actually, Tracy, I want to bring you in here. What do you think about that idea of, people feeling, a sense of a shelf life? Do you does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, it does. I actually, I wrote a book called Between a Rock and a Hot Place, Why 50 is Not the New 30. And I feel that people really do think, people say, oh, you don't look 50, or you don't act 50, or you don't act 60. And I think that's this collective mindset that once you reach a certain point, they put you on the old shelf. And so, and as Bobby says, once you're on the old shelf, you're not supposed to have sex. You're not supposed to be productive in the way you once were. And I think I think that this generation, the boomers, have pretty much said, you're not going to put, for the most part, you're not going to put us on a shelf. We're going to reinvent that. We're going to go on and be productive and be relevant in different ways and keep working and keep it looking good and keep exercising. And it's not, but I like to say, it's not my grandmother's 50.
What do you mean by that, Tracy? It's not your grandmother's 50.
Well, I think we have, people have an automatic response. They'll look at Bobby and they'll say, my God, you don't look 62, because when we were growing up 62, if I looked at my grandfather at 62, he looked nothing like Bobby Levithan. My grandmother, I'll be 56 soon, looked nothing like me at 56. And I think that we have this sense of our grandparents aging, what they looked like, what their lives looked like. And that's not what it's like today.
Joan, what do you think about that? This idea of it's not, I'm not my grandmother's 50, I'm not my grandmother's 60. What do you think about that?
Well, I think maybe we misunderstood what our grandmothers were going through. I assumed one thing, and I'm not living it. I'm the oldster here at 70, and oh my goodness, it's nothing like what I expected. I never could have imagined the full life, the full physical activity, the full mental activity, sexual activity that is possible to experience at this age. Who knew? That's why I write books about this stuff too.
So Joan, specifically, tell me how sex is different or how it's different now than you imagined it would be, after you reach 50.
How long have you got? Well, okay.
It does get better.
Yeah, I wrote 3 books on it so far. Is it the same as sex when we were 20? No, not whatsoever. We don't have that same biological urge. The hormones are not driving our sexuality. So that's not a bad thing, because what is driving our sexuality is something totally different. It's the desire for pleasure, for bonding, for intimacy, for excitement, for arousal, there's so many great reasons to have sex that have nothing to do with how much estrogen or testosterone our bodies are giving us.
That's a good point, Joan. Actually, I want to read another excerpt from your book, Robert, where you say, this is my age. I ride a Segway. I enjoyed sex. I have friends from 22 to 90, and I am still willing to risk having my heart broken in order to feel it full. And I don't always act like this society's picture of an almost 60-year-old. I have better things to do with my time. Crucial to the new 60 is honoring what brings the feeling of aliveness. Tell me about that feeling of aliveness. When have you last felt that?
Oh, riding my Segway, yesterday, or, walking out in the rain today and going, oh, rain, alive. But again, it's related to the, having faced my mortality. Life is, as Mark Matusko says, everything is gravy. The fact that I wake up every day. my father lived to be almost 94, and he was very alive. And we used to talk about things because at a certain point, actuarially, we were the same age. So we were approaching our lives, even though he was 40 years older than me, with, are we satisfied? You know, I would say to him, if I died soon, don't worry, I've lived fully. And he'd say, yeah, me too. And so our goal was to say, I try to live every year as if it could be my last year. And now I add in the factor that I might also live to be 90. And so I want to bring both of those things into how I live my life. But in case it's my last year, I don't want to miss out on pleasure, excitement, satisfaction, being productive. So, you know, again, it's back to what am I waiting for?
So do you feel like, or maybe Tracy, I'll come to you this question as well. Do you feel like there's a certain sense of if you live with your mortality, and you're not afraid of your mortality, you know, if you live with your mortality as kind of something that it's ever present, if you just look death in the face, basically, do you feel like you're living then more fully, that's the way to really enjoy life to the fullest, is to embrace the fact that, you know, death is there too?
Well, I think that, I mean, I think I've looked at death since I was a kid. I think I have some twisted view of the world. But I think the older you get, I think one of the things that comes along with aging and why I don't think people should think they're 30, I think they should live to the fullest, as both your guests, you know, talk about very eloquently. But I think the thing that comes along with aging that's unavoidable is not everyone has the experience, you know, Bobby had with facing HIV at a young age and really having to look down the barrel of death. But we certainly have all had health scares at the point you get to a certain age. We've all lost our friends at this age. There's not one, the three of us, I'm sure, all could list the people around us who have died. Parents, loved ones, best friends. You know, you become on a daily basis, mortality is there. It's one of the things as you age, you cannot escape. So you can still have great sex and you can still have a vibrant life and you can still have all your marbles and ride a Segway and do everything you can do. But you're going to get that call that, guess what? You know, your best friend died. And I think that if you take it as part of life and give it the respect it's due, but also be aware that it could be you, and that is part of aging, I think it keeps you on your toes. And I think if you're alert and you want to live fully, you can take one of two attitudes. You can take the attitude, oh, it's all over and I'm just going to sit in the Barca Lounger and wait. Or you can take the attitude that I'm going to live every moment as fully and completely as I possibly can. And I'm going to accomplish as much as however many years I have left as I can.
So Tracy,
like
what about the externals? I've got a couple of comments here from people that are watching us live, and thanks to guys for the comments. This one from Sarita Teresa, who says, I lied about my age when I was 15 to get my first job. These days I have to convince people I am indeed 36, or I have to convince people that my 20-year-old daughter is indeed my daughter. And then one more comment, this is from Helena S, who says, what about the view on beauty treatments such as facelifts, breast implants, Botox parties? This was not common about 50 years ago. Joan, what do you think about that?
I think whatever people choose to do is fine. I'm not judgmental about it, but personally, I don't color my hair. I did for a while, and then I said, let me see what I look like without coloring my hair, and I liked it, so I don't do that anymore. I haven't had any treatments. I don't plan to ever have any treatments. I am not trying to recapture my youth because I'm a happier person at this age than I was as a young person.
And that, I feel, Joan, it feels like that there's a great deal of like being comfortable with yourself, that there's part of that. And, you know, Robert, you wrote this blog yesterday on HuffPost, What's Wrong with Being Single? And, you know, in your book, The New 60, you write an awful lot about, you know, not necessarily being somebody who subscribes to monogamous relationships all the time, but also that within any relationship, it's important to hold a sense of the I. Tell me a little bit about that. Why?
Well, in a healthy relationship, I believe there's two I's and a we. So they all need to be nurtured. And some relationships, when things are off, usually it's because either the I's are not being nurtured or the we. But, you know, about being single, it's really about being an individual. It's not necessarily about being solitary, or certainly not celibate, not being dating, not having relationships, but to be really clear, I am myself, and that's my first job. But we like to say at Friends Indeed, where I work part-time, the crisis center, that, you know, our number one job on planet Earth is the care of our own soul. And so if I'm not taking care of my own soul, my own well-being, I'm not singular in that healthy sense, then how can I be in a relationship?
Yeah, Joan, what do you think about that idea?
Oh, I absolutely agree. If we don't, I mean, how can we truly love or even enter into a relationship of any kind with somebody if we don't know who we are at this moment and if we're not nurturing ourselves? That gives us what we have to give. That gives us the knowledge of what we have to give and what we want. It's the only way to come together with another person, I think, at this age or any age.
Well, Joan, Tracy and Robert, I want to thank you all so much for joining me today for this conversation on aging. I think we'll have to do a part two. We'll have to do a part two follow-up.
Absolutely.
Let's do